today does mark 2 weeks after former President Trump survived an assassination attempt that left a bystander dead and 2 others wounded. And after days of Capitol Hill testimony, several major questions remain unanswered but could make sense of the case. That's according to experts. Now, among those who appeared before Congress were Kimberly Cheadle, who was the director of the Secret Service until resigning just about 24 hours after she testified, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Christopher Harris. After law enforcement spotted the would-be assassin, Thomas Crooks, and labeled him as a person of interest, he managed to drop out of view, climb up onto a roof with a direct line of sight of former President Trump. Then he opened fire, striking Trump in the ear with a bullet, according to the FBI, killing a man in the audience and critically wounding 2 others. Some of those still unanswered questions include: why was Trump allowed to take the stage if there were any active questions about security? How and why the rooftop wasn't secure? Plans did call for it to be sterile. And what made Crooks decide to attempt the assassination? I do want to bring in Eric ONeill, who is a former FBI counterterrorism and counterintelligence operative, to speak with us on this. Eric, thank you for taking the time to speak with us on this Sunday.
Stephanie, thanks for having me back on Fox.
Absolutely. I do want to first start off with the FBI now confirming that former President Trump was indeed struck in the ear by a bullet. Why did it take so long for them to confirm that information?
I'm not quite sure about that. I would have suspected that Director Wray would have had that information during his testimony. It seemed to me like he flubbed. He may not have known, and so he said it might be a fragment, it might be a bullet. I think it was pretty clear by the time of his testimony, though, to anyone who had seen it and to some of the reconstructions that people did and posted all over, that it was a bullet that just missed Trump in the second one, and the first one hit his ear.
And I do want to ask you about the hearings held on Capitol Hill earlier this week. 3 days of hearings, including now former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, as well as FBI Director Christopher Wray. What did you make of those hearings that took place earlier this week?
Well, last time I was on with you, Stephanie, I was a little kinder to the Secret Service, but I don't think I'm going to go that far this time. I see this as a failure in planning, a failure in communication, and a failure in execution. We've learned a little bit more, but each thing we learn suggests that there's more questions than answers. Right now, there still is no motive. I know that the FBI is tearing Crooks' life apart and looking at his background. They've gotten into his phone finally, but there were no details. So it seems that this individual, this 20-year-old, was very good at covering his tracks and scrubbing, his past information. Now, I'm sure it's still out there, and I suspect we will get a motive eventually. Now, the FBI also says there's no evidence of co-conspirators, but honestly, I wouldn't rule it out. This shows an amazing amount of planning for a 20-year-old kid to not only evade multiple layers of police, but get on a rooftop within 200 meters of the President of the United States. That's about 400 feet. And that's an easy shot for anybody who's taken a little bit of training with a firearm.
And also the fact that Crooks also flew a drone over the rally site, and that wasn't flagged by law enforcement or Secret Service. A lot of people very frustrated, very upset by the lack of transparency during these hearings. A lot of these questions that seem to be relatively straightforward could not be answered. Why is that? Obviously, there is confidential information that may not be able to be made public, but some of these questions were I would imagine, obvious.
Well, I think, first of all, former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle was woefully underprepared for her testimony. Either she was completely the most unprepared I've ever seen somebody provide testimony, to the point where that was the first time I've seen a congressional inquiry that bipartisan. Everybody was united, Democrat and Republican, for the first time in a long time, in grilling her. So either she wasn't being forthcoming or she was completely unprepared. She should have had a timeline in front of her to explain what happened. Now, there are things, particularly if they're national security related things or information about an ongoing investigation that shouldn't be released to the public. But those particulars would be hidden if they were looking for a co-conspirator, and that's why I said let's not rule that out, because there could be more that the FBI knows and the Secret Service knows that we don't know yet, because they're still looking for someone who may have aided or assisted crooks.
And when it comes to this type of investigation, when might we expect to learn more information? When might that be made public?
Well, it's already been 2 weeks since the shooting, or it's been some time now. There have been 3 testimonies before Congress. There is a congressional inquiry. The FBI has been combing through everything. I have heard that task force is rather large. The Secret Service, of course, is doing their own investigation because they have a lot of mud on their face. I would suspect that within a few weeks we'll at least know something more than we know now. I would, if I had to guess, I'd say by then we would have a motive.
So from your perspective, where does the investigation stand now?
Well, right now, I think they are still trying to put together some of the pieces, and like I said, a lack of planning, communication, and execution. I mean, if we want to just run through it super fast, there was a bad lack of coordination between the Secret Service and local law enforcement. Now, a lot of local law enforcement have come forth and they've given interviews and talked about how, for example, they didn't have a good way of communicating back and forth, that the law enforcement, as you said, had identified Crooks as a person of interest, but the Secret Service had come back and said, yeah, let him go, even though he was using a rangefinder. There was a failure to account for better vantage points. Like there was a water tower that would have been a perfect spot for a sniper to see the entire field in front of him, and for that rooftop that Crooks used. And like you said, why weren't they using drone surveillance? I mean, today, with the technology we have, a drone can give you that perfect overview of everything that is happening in real time. And if there was a drone, they would have seen Crooks climbing up on that roof before he took those shots. So just minutes could have been the difference between a hero dying in that crowd and 2 people getting grievously injured, and the former president getting shot in the ear, or Crooks getting taken down before he even fired 1 shot.
Before we let you go, Eric, is there anything else that you are very much interested in learning, or some of the questions that you have? Again, some of these questions that were asked on Capitol Hill seem quite straightforward, and as you mentioned, the now former director of the Secret Service couldn't even talk about a timeline or how many Secret Service agents there were at that rally. Very obvious questions you think that she would have had answers to.
Well, the number one question in my mind, now that we know about the site survey, now what she did say, the one thing she did say that's really interesting is that site survey that the Secret Service did, it contemplated that rooftop. I mean, obviously, anyone could have figured out that that's a great place to take a shot at anyone speaking in that area. So that rooftop was contemplated in the site survey and should have been guarded. There was a breakdown in communication between the Secret Service and the local sniper team, who for some reason were inside the building, and apparently, according to them, they asked the Secret Service if that was okay, and they said that was fine. So why wasn't someone on that roof? Someone should have been on the roof. The Secret Service should have made sure someone was on the roof, or that roof should have been covered. And there were plenty of vantage points, either the water tower or using drone surveillance to make sure the roof was covered without having a human on it. So there is a serious breakdown right there in that planning and execution, and that is what I want answers to.
Eric, is this just an absolute catastrophic breakdown of communication, or, as you mentioned, could this possibly be something more? You did say that you're not ruling out perhaps that Crooks, was aided by others, but is this more, or is this just a simple textbook case of just absolute failure and breakdown in communication?
Yeah, before I start going into conspiracy theories, I tend to think that it is just complete failures, in all ways. I would lean towards this is just the Secret Service doing a historically bad job, other than someone actually helping this guy get on the roof. It seems like fate was on his side, Crooks' side, in getting him onto that roof, just as it was on the side of the president. In surviving that unbelievable shot, because it also turns out that that Crooks was a pretty decent shot. there are people who were shooting with him at a training facility who said that he was able to impact the center of a target in a very close bullet spread. So, I mean, like almost hitting bullet after bullet. So from that range, there's no way he could have missed.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on this Sunday. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie.